Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the 784th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. My name is Bob Steele and I'm a partner and vice chair at Parella Weinberg Partners and also fortunate enough to be the chair of our club. It's great to have you all with us today in a great location and with a great program. First, let me extend a welcome to the students that are joining us virtually today. They're from Baruch College, Mercy University, and CUNY's Graduate Center, and it's wonderful to have them to be able to join. We're pleased, and I know how excited they are. The Economic Club is proud to stand as one of the nation's leading nonpartisan platforms for discussion on economic, social, and political matters. For more than 100 years, the club has hosted over 1,000 preeminent guest speakers, contributing to our long tradition of excellence. We continue that tradition today with our program. Today, our distinguished guest is Sian Beilock. Sian is the first woman to have been elected president of Dartmouth by the Board of Trustees and began her tenure on June 12th of 2023. Quite an auspicious time to begin as a university president at an important university. Under Sian's leadership, Dartmouth is addressing key issues in higher education, expanding affordability for middle-income families, reinstating standardized testing in holistic admissions, and launching the Commitment to Care mental health plan, and also at the same time investing over $500 million in sustainability on their campus. Sian has spearheaded the launch of Dartmouth Dialogues, a first-of-its-kind initiative in higher education to facilitate conversation and skills that bridge political and personal divides and advance meaningful debate on current issues. Let's think for a second. When lots of people are throwing rocks, then Sian is telling us, let's get together and understand different perspectives, which is what to all of us, I believe, is higher education should be about. She's one of the world's foremost experts on performance under pressure, receiving the 2017 Troland Award from the National Academy of Sciences. She's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and one of the highest honors in her field. She's worked closely also as part of this research with Fortune 500 companies, professional sports teams, and public sector leaders to build high-performing teams and create environments that attract, retain, and get the very best out of their talent. Sian has authored over 120 peer-reviewed papers and as well as 2 critically acclaimed books, Choke and How the Body Knows Its Mind, both of which have been published in over a dozen languages. Her 2017 TED Talk on performance under pressure has been seen almost 3 million times. Previously, she served as the president of Barnard College at Columbia University and executive vice provost at the University of Chicago. I think lots of her themes, I say this as a Chicago graduate proudly, are really based in some of the ideas at the University of Chicago. Bob Zimmer, the late Bob Zimmer, was a champion of many of these things, and those of us that were lucky enough to know Bob are excited that these ideas are being carried forward with Sian and other leaders in higher education. Sian earned her Bachelor of Science in Cognitive Science from the University of California in San Diego and doctorate degrees in Psychology and Kinesiology from Michigan State University. Today, our plan is to have Sian and Paul Gigot come here forward. Paul is, I'm fortunate enough to say, a good friend who I've respected for so long. Paul's position is editor of the editorial page at the Wall Street Journal and host of the Fox News, the Journal Editorial Report. As a reminder, this conversation is on the record because we have media in the room and on the line. So time permitting, we'll take a few questions at the end, but now I'm excited to have Sian and Paul join us on the stage. Thank you very, very much.
I want to bring the... Sian, do you want water? Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Sian, for coming to do this and be in New York at the Economic Club. So before we get into many of the interesting things you're doing at Dartmouth, I want to start out with a kind of a framing question about the public's view of higher education. And I can, as you know, like a lot of institutions, the public's view of higher ed is down, and I can say that with some authority as a journalist. the public's view of journalism these days is somewhere below that of Congress, which means we're pretty much down to friends and family. But the Gallup survey, 57% of Americans had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher ed in 2015. 48% in 2018, and 36% in 2023. Why do you think that is?
I mean, trust in public institutions overall has gone down, and there's no question that higher education is part of that. You know, I think one of the issues that we're facing and dealing with is being true to what our mission is and coming back to what we do best. We are an educational institution. We are not a political institution. We are not a social action institution. What we do at Dartmouth is educate the next leader. And so part of the work that I think we have to do as higher ed is to tell that story, make it affordable for folks across our country to be at our best institutions, and to talk about, and again, show the impact of what we do, not just in educating students, but in terms of American competitiveness and the research impact that we have on our country and the world.
Those are all terrific goals, but why is the public sour? Why is it soured on higher ed, do you think? I mean, are there 2 or 3 reasons that come to the top of your mind? Not Dartmouth per se, but I'm just talking about in general.
Yeah, I mean, in general, affordability is a huge issue. We want to make sure that students can go to great institutions and come out and take positions that aren't where they're not saddled with debt. That is certainly one. I think there is a perception that our institutions are ideologically homogeneous, and we have a real work to do to recenter our institutions. And again, going back to the central theme that I spoke about before, our mission has gotten more murky. We have to define our mission as education institutions. Dartmouth doesn't have a foreign policy. We are there to educate students. We are there to bring students with different perspectives from different stratospheres of income and bring them to learn how to think and have an impact. And we have not been clear about that, I think, across the sector, especially in recent years.
You mentioned the perception of ideological homogeneity. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is to a certain extent. Schools vary on that, but it's something that is so important to work on, both for our students and our faculty. And I believe, and as you know, I've talked a lot about this, we are not going to get to the best ideas, the best outcomes, unless we have people with different views at the table pushing at each other.
All right, let's dig into what you're doing at Dartmouth to try to address some of these issues. And recently you wrote in my newspaper an op-ed where you laid out something that you called Dartmouth's Principles of Institutional Restraint. This is coming off the Chicago Principle of Institutional Neutrality. Why don't you elaborate on what you're trying to do with that project and how it relates to the notion, and define for all of us what institutional neutrality is.
So institutional neutrality, or restraint as we call it, again, is the idea that a university should be a place where you can have different views and opinions at the table, and you want to encourage that freedom of expression. It's harder to do that when the institutional takes a particular side, because it essentially quells dialogue on one side of the issue. And so what Dartmouth reaffirmed, largely based on Chicago and the Chicago Principles, and before that, the Calvin Report at Chicago, is this idea that the institution is supposed to be, as the Calvin Report talks about, the sponsor of critics, not critics themselves. And this goes back to the notion that I talked about, that you want people with different perspectives feeling comfortable to voice their opinions, and it's certainly hard to do that if an institution is taking a political perspective on something where there are different voices on either side. Now, what I think is so important about what Dartmouth did is that it's not just about the institution, what I say are right, but our principles of restraint, which were developed by a faculty committee and endorsed by our faculty council, really goes down to the departments and academic units as well. Because you want students to want to major in different departments, to see different areas, and not be turned off because a particular department has an endorsed in a view. And you want faculty within that department to feel like they can speak their mind. And so the whole idea here is opening up the aperture for individuals and our faculty experts, our students, to speak their minds on campus.
So you're drilling that principle down to departments. These are academic departments. Explain how that works in practice at the departmental level. I mean, what do you expect of the faculty who run the department?
Well, first we expect that they will refrain, as I do, from making statements on political or social issues that are not directly related to our mission. This is not a principle to just be quiet, but it's a principle to and a set of policies designed to help us focus on our mission. So we're perfectly allowed to speak to our educational mission, but it's essentially being clear that that is where we should be speaking. That's our expert voice. So I hope faculty will do the same. It also lays out pretty specific procedures for when a faculty department could make a statement. It needs to be related to their area of expertise, and they're actually procedures for faculty voting in an anonymous way so that they don't pressure each other to make that statement. And
just to drill down on that a little bit, when you say in anonymous ways, so I don't know how many, let's say there are 30 professors of the history department.
That's right.
So the department will issue some kind of general principle of neutrality, and then if it wants to make a statement on, say, the 1619 project, say, which is relevant to the history department, they have to vote in anonymous fashion on whether to issue that statement?
Yeah, they have to talk about who supported it, who didn't, and this is also a place where we ask them not to put it on their department websites front and center in terms of this is what the department stands for, but to have a separate place to do this, to talk about their area of expertise.
So the history department would not be able, let's say that there are a number of professors who think that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Been known to happen. So they would not be able in the history department to issue a departmental statement on that?
Yeah, they are perfectly able to say that as individuals and a collection of individuals, but the idea that the department is taking a political position, I think to do that essentially discourages students, other faculty who might feel differently from being in that public sphere, from having those conversations. And the idea is that that reduces our ability to do what we do best. We have one sole focus, which is academic excellence.
But if you're a Dartmouth student, you know, everybody comes in, they know the departments, they know the professors, they know the good professors, they know the easy A, right? They know, they learn this stuff very fast. If all of the individual professors, or most of them, or the loudest in a department, their politics are well known, won't that dwarf kind of some statement of neutrality from the department head?
Look,
or the department?
Individuals, all of us in this room are free to speak on our politics, and our faculty are as well, and they're imbued with academic freedom, which allows them to speak to their areas of academic expertise. We're not trying to quell that. What we're trying to do is create an environment and culture where people feel like they can have different ideas and be at the table. And I will say that I've been pretty impressed with our faculty for being able to allow for that diversity of thought in the classroom and teaching about their subject matter rather than from their political views. What this does is, again, it underscores a culture we're trying to create at Dartmouth, a culture where people aren't self-censoring, where they go situations not looking for a safe space, but a brave space, a space where they will feel uncomfortable and challenged. And again, this is the purpose of an academic institution, to bring those different perspectives together, to challenge each other so that you can get to the best outcomes. And I think it's one of the few places where, if we do it right, you can have that kind of disagreement and diversity of thought.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like you consider this almost a branding exercise for Dartmouth.
Well, I wouldn't put it simply as branding, although I think branding
it's a room full of the economic club.
Important. I think this is central to the mission of a university. And if that means branding and being clear that this is what Dartmouth stands for, I'm okay with that. We want to attract students. I want to attract students who think it is cool to have dialogue, not to shout each other down. I want to attract people who will meet their roommate who comes from a very different background and learn to have conversation across differences. And I want to attract faculty who are interested in pushing at that as well.
Well, I want to ask about that. The faculty, how does these principles affect hiring and faculty tenure decisions? Because in your op-ed with us, you said, I think rightly so, faculty is the heart of an institution. They're there for the long term. The students are there for 4 years. The alumni are kind of there, but not there. So you have the faculty, and yet, and I think it was, you know this well because of Chicago, but the Shills report in 1970 said that Chicago should make decisions, in essence, on hiring promotion, only take into account academic excellence and nothing else. How do you assure that that happens when you have people who are have strong views in a department?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a system of checks and balances. Our faculty, when they get tenure, which is a really important part of their academic journey, are nominated by their department. We get dozens and dozens of letters from outside. They go through a committee that looks across the university and thinks about their tenure. It's recommended from a dean, and then I ultimately, and the board makes the final decision. But every tenure decision comes across my desk. And it is, again, putting those principles out there that faculty should be looked at for their research and scholarship, their teaching, and not based on a particular political view.
Have you vetoed any tenure decisions so far?
There are certainly people who have come up for tenure who have not received tenure.
Diplomatic answer. How many conservatives do you think, conservatives who would assert their conservative views, do you think there are in my major at Dartmouth, which was the government department now?
That's interesting. I mean, I think I don't have a census. I know there's been some attempts to do census at institutions. I think Dartmouth is more politically balanced than most of our peers, and our faculty teach across the ideological spectrum. One of the things that I'm also really proud of is that we bring in lots of outside speakers and outside teachers, and so the goal always is to have different views on campus. We had everyone from Mike Pence in the fall, we have Anita Hill coming, we had a great debate put on by the students between Kellyanne Conway and Donna Brazil. This is the kind of environment you want to have on campus, and so we are seeing individuals across the political spectrum on our campus constantly.
And this relates to another, something else that you've introduced, which is the Dartmouth Dialogues. Why don't you tell us more about that?
You know, in the way, I don't think anyone expected the terrorist attacks on October 7th. I took the presidency just a few months before, and I had my inauguration maybe a month before, and I talked about this idea of creating brave rather than safe spaces, spaces where it's okay to feel uncomfortable and where we model what it's like to have difficult discourse. And after the terrorist attacks, many universities were issuing statements, we were as well, condemning them. But really it came back to thinking about what the purpose of a university is, and that's education. And so in my statement, in addition to really condemning what had happened, I reminded our campus that we are an institution where we're trying to learn across different perspectives. And our faculty were willing to step up, our faculty across Jewish and Middle Eastern studies, who had taught together for years. They had taught a class on the politics of Israel and Palestine. They were willing to step up, and they hosted 2 public debates, I believe on October 9th and maybe 12th or somewhere in that, where they essentially talked about the history of the region, and they live streamed it. They did it for all students, and community members were there. And the whole idea was that we're going to try and model how to have dialogue across different difficult issues. And from there, this has led to a school-wide effort to bring different speakers to campus, to model that kind of dialogue, and also to train students in having difficult conversations and listening across difference. I believe that learning to talk to people and listen is a skill like anything else. And so this year, as part of Dartmouth Dialogues, all of our first years did dialogue training. They learned how to talk to people that were different than themselves, and they'll continue to practice that. And so it's got to be modeled by our faculty. We've got to see it on campus. The institution not taking a political stance is part of it, and then you have to train it. These young people need help, like all of us do, in talking across political and personal divides.
Can you give us some examples, a couple of examples of where this, the kind of conversations, dialogues you're having on other issues?
So we had the special topic on the Middle East last year with our faculty in Jewish and Middle Eastern Studies. This year we're doing a special topic on immigration, which certainly brings up lots of differing viewpoints. As I said, we have a student-run political union that's launched, that is doing debates. They have a debate this quarter around DEI and the role of DEI on our institutions in our country. We're attacking pretty heated topics to get to that.
Do you really have somebody on campus, professor or a student, who is willing to oppose DEI?
We have people who are coming and talking about what DEI looks like. I believe that having a diversity of perspectives and lived experience is so important for what we do. But to have conversations about what's worked well, what's not, where we need to go, our faculty and students are willing to do that.
You're saying they're willing to listen, but is there anybody institutionally inside who would be
Yes.
brave enough to take that on?
I think part of what creating the culture is opening up permission for people to be brave and have opposing views. I certainly modeled last year what it was like to make decisions that not everyone agreed with, and I've been really pleasantly surprised to see so many faculty, students, and staff willing to speak up. We have, as you know, a history of having different journalistic viewpoints on campus. We have the Dartmouth, our paper, and also the Dartmouth Review, which is a more conservative paper on campus. And I do think we're not perfect. We have a lot of work to do, and my goal is certainly to recenter our institution. But the goal is to create a culture where people have permission to voice opinions that are different than those around them.
You mentioned young people many times and having to train them. Do you notice in this generation of students a difference than when you were a student in the campus environment, excuse me, and the willingness of students to be open to that? Because I notice that a lot of young people that I meet, that young people always bring enormous passion to subjects, right? But there's a little less tolerance for oh, that's an interesting point of view I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I think there's two issues going on, and this is my perspective just from interactions and from listening to many of our faculty experts. One is that we have some of the highest incidence of depression and anxiety among young people, college-age people, that we've seen in many decades. And one of our faculty members in econ talks about the happiness problem, that young people used to be some of the happiest, and now they're not worldwide. That's really important, because if you don't feel okay about yourself, you're not going to want to be in situations that create anxiety. This is my research as a cognitive scientist. When you're anxious, you stay away from things that make you anxious. So if we're not helping young people deal with anxiety, depression, other issues, they're not going to want to put themselves in brave conversations. They're going to look for people who think like them and where it's easy and safe. So I think that's one issue that has changed, and we can talk about why that's the case. The second issue is that our young people have grown up with social media in a way where you are really ostracized from giving viewpoints that are different from your own. And lots of people think that relates to the depression and anxiety and loneliness. And one of the stories that my director of Dartmouth Dialogues tells, just over the 10 years she's been at Dartmouth, is that it used to be when two students had a conflict, they would talk to each other face to face. Then they started to text each other. Then they stopped texting, and now they leave a voice memo and don't even listen to what the other person. So we've moved away from interacting. Young people, if any of you have a young person or know them, I have a 13-year-old, they're afraid to talk on the phone, right? To have these face-to-face calls. What do you mean I should call them? And so we have to train this. This is a skill, learning how to listen, learning how to ask meaningful questions. asking and giving an opinion that you know someone else is not going to agree with, I think there is less tolerance for that, but I think we know some of why that's the case, and we can work on it. And that's the purpose of our universities.
It's very different than when I was in school. I mean, I used to love mixing it up. I mean, I was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Dartmouth at the time, and I remember we endorsed Jimmy Carter in 1976. I did not agree with that decision, but we had a very robust conversation about it, and you know, nobody went away going, "I'm offended." You know, so that's a different world on that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about you had a baptism by fire, obviously, the timing of when you came in. October 7th happens. The college issues a statement, not widely admired in some quarters. I take some responsibility for that. But you issued another statement, and then you had protests on campus, and you know, the police were called in at one point. I don't remember exactly the chronology of that. And you took some heat for that, and you got praise for that as well. I wonder what lessons sort of that whole experience is, what did you take from that if you have to do it all again?
Yeah. So you know I don't agree with your characterization of my statement.
You made that clear.
Because what I did was talk about the purpose of an institution, which was to have dialogue. And I got criticism for saying, oh, you shouldn't be bringing faculty to the table right now. It's too soon. We should just be thinking about mourning and how horrific the terrorist attacks were. But again, it comes back to what the purpose of an institution is. It's to create those spaces for dialogue. And so that's what we did. And we also, though, are clear that there are boundary conditions. One's free expression, one's ability to have dialogue cannot take over another person's ability to have dialogue. And we have to create a campus where people feel safe and included, regardless of their religion, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their political ideology. You need those boundary conditions to have free expression. And so I've been clear about that. The purpose of our institution is to have these kinds of difficult conversations. Protest is fine. Disrupting someone speaking or taking over a shared space and declaring it for one ideology, as the encampments did, is not only unsafe, but it robs others of free expression on campus. And so I definitely got heat for some of the decisions. We've been very clear and consistent. This has nothing to do with a particular point of view. It has everything to do with the fact that my entire goal is to create a community where everyone feels welcome and that they can voice their opinion on campus free of hate. And most of my peers did not follow suit in that. And I think it made it harder for me to do my job. But I feel, look, no one ever wants the police on campus. But I feel that it is so important to maintain a safe environment and maintain an environment where one's free expression doesn't get to rob someone else's.
Where do you draw the line on physical demonstrations and protests? Do you have any kind of mental idea of where that is?
Yeah, I mean, we have rules that are very clear. You can have a protest. You can stand outside my building and protest. And we had 25 protests last year. You cannot set up tents and declare it a space for one idea.
Over part of the green?
No.
Okay.
And we actually have very clear rules about that. None of this has been a surprise to anyone. And, you know, civil disobedience in certain forms can be considered brave, but there's also consequences for those actions. And we've been clear about that and consistent, and it doesn't matter to me what you're protesting out there. You don't get to decide that part of my campus is for one view.
The issue of consequences I want to follow up on, because sanctions for breaking rules is something that if you don't impose them, you're going to get more rule breaking, at least in my worldview. So so I mean, what is your hierarchy of sanctions if you know, they set up a protest and not just a protest and carry placards and insult you or something, but if they have something on the green, or if they're harassing students, or if they break up, let's say you have an outside speaker who's controversial.
Yeah.
And they disrupt and chant.
Yeah, so we had this fall, we had John Fetterman on campus for an event with our Rockefeller Center for Public Policy, and we really are trying to ensure that students have the opportunity to have opposing views and voice them. So we had protests outside, that was perfectly fine. We had protests inside, and we had a couple of people who got up and disrupted and tried to shout the speaker down. We have a great program called Open Expression Facilitators, where we have someone come and try and talk to them. We want them to stop. And these are staff trained to deal with it.
During the event?
Yes.
I see.
But if they don't stop, then at that point, the Hanover police came in and took them out, and they were arrested. And again, the idea is that protest is perfectly fine. I think there are better ways to get your viewpoint across, but I know it's an important part of free expression, but the line is crossed when you disrupt or shout down someone.
So they were arrested and charged with criminal violations in the Hanover.
Yep, and they also went, the student and I believe it was a staff member went through disciplinary processes on campus.
On campus. Do you believe in suspension as a sanction?
I would like to be, to not have to impose that, but sure. I mean, all the way through expulsion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, that's fascinating stuff. I want to ask you about one other thing you did, which we praised you for, which was you were one of the
One
first,
out of two, not bad.
2 out of 3 because we gave you credit for the union stuff too,
Yes.
trying to the Dartmouth basketball team too. But this is your reinstatement of the SAT in admissions. And you're one of the leaders on that. A lot of schools have followed. Take us through your thinking there.
Yeah, so this is something that as a psychologist and someone who's very interested in how we determine who's going to be most likely to succeed in a particular area, like at Dartmouth, I've been very interested in some time. And a lot of institutions went test optional during the pandemic because students couldn't get to testing sites. But I wondered if being test optional was actually beneficial to us identifying the best students and bringing in a broad array of students who are excelling wherever they are. And the lore had been that, yes, test optional is better for finding lower income students, finding more racially diverse students, but the data didn't necessarily suggest that was the case. There's really interesting data by Raj Chetty, who's at Harvard, looking at the power of standardized tests in terms of predicting. And we then looked at our own data. So we had some of our economics and sociology professors analyze our data over time to ask this question: is this an important tool in our arsenal for identifying our best class? And it goes back to what our North Star is, which is to find students from the broadest swath of society who are excelling wherever they are, bring them to Dartmouth, how to think, not what to think, so that they can go out and be leaders of our democracy. And the data were clear that, first of all, the SAT or ACT is an important predictor of success at Dartmouth. Perhaps not so surprising, but the data were there. The other thing that was really interesting is what we found in the test optional situation was that students coming from lower income high schools or high schools that tended not to be as academically rigorous were more likely to not report their score than students who are coming from the more academically intense high schools. And what we found is that we got their scores after the fact, that this was actually a really important predictor of success, how students were scoring on these tests relative to the mean of, say, their high school or their region. So by having a test optional policy, we were actually disadvantaging students who we wanted to attract. 1 in 5 students at Dartmouth is Pell eligible, low income, and we have 1 in 2 of our students are on financial aid, and we're looking for the best students who have the ability to succeed. And so we made the decision to reinstate testing and to tell a story that I think many people just thought the opposite, that these tests were hurting students, and to tell the story with the data, to stand by our principles. And we had a lot of conversations about it. And my board was actually very supportive of doing this, although I made it clear that this was an academic decision and not their decision, which was really important. But one of my board members, who is made a career telling stories, said, you know, you got to narrate your own story here. And if you believe the data, and you have to tell the story. And so we went first and we told the story. And I think it was compelling. A lot of people were looking at this and a lot have followed. And, you know, we got some pushback, but for the most part, I think a lot of support for this. And it's an important part of meritocracy, of finding those students who are going to be excellent. And we know the educational system isn't equal, but we also know that when students are excelling in their local environment, they have a great chance of succeeding at Dartmouth.
What's your response to the criticism that that testing benefits students who have the means, parents have the means to take the courses to test to the test versus those who don't?
I think it's a totally fair criticism that you can practice to these tests, but the way that we look at the tests is to look at student score in the context of where they went to school. So if a student has a 1400 and they went to a school where the mean is 1000, that tells us something really important. And so we actually think this is a way to get around some of these effects. And the idea that the SAT or ACT is racist or just reflects only inequality, the data don't show that. The data show that it can be an important tool for finding those students who are excelling in an environment that might be less optimal and bringing them to Dartmouth. And again, this is what our American institutions should be doing. They should be a seed of social mobility. We should be identifying students who will really benefit from our education and go out and lead our world. And I think this is another tool in our toolbox to do it.
On the social mobility point, do you think that legacy admission should be given an advantage?
So people can have different ideas about this. I've been very clear that I think legacy is one tool that we can use to build a great, diverse class. And here's why. First of all, no one gets in because they have a parent or a grandparent who went to Dartmouth. On average, those students who have that are scoring higher, have better credentials than our class as a whole. So it's not that we're letting in students that are not qualified. Second, I think part of building a great class is building that diverse class where we have students who are first gen, where we have students who grew up with connections to Dartmouth, and it's them talking to each other. It's the student who grew up in the middle of the country in public high school where they're one of few to go to college, who goes home at Thanksgiving and goes to dinner with their roommate and their roommate's mom, who's the CEO of a big company. That is where those connections come from. So I think it is an important aspect of that. And the last thing I'll say is that it builds the kind of excitement and support for our institution. Our institution is based on philanthropy. It's a big part of it. And our ability to provide financial aid for our students is based on the philanthropy of everyone around us. And so I think it is an important part of what we do. It's a small part, but until someone tells me I can't do it, I am in favor of legacy as one aspect of what we do.
What percentage of Dartmouth students are on some kind of aid?
Over 50%.
Over 50%.
1 in 5 are Pell, and we now have grown our financial aid 70% in the last 10 years through a big campaign and support from our alums and our parents. And now for students whose families, for example, make up to $125,000 a year, it's about $5,000 a year to go to Dartmouth. There are no loans, no parent contributions, and we're really working to help students be at Dartmouth.
You mentioned a couple of times the cost of education. There's a lot of people who think that the business model, if you will, of higher ed is broken, partly because of cost and partly because of student debt. Student debt is what, $1.5 trillion now? I forget what the last count was, but it's not going down. And you have a lot of students saddled with that coming out. What should we do about that? Because my point of view is that what happens was when you subsidize student loans, it gets capitalized into the tuition.
Yeah.
I think the economic evidence is very clear on that. But what do we do about that upward ratchet?
Yeah, I mean, there is no question that affordability is a really important issue. I feel really great about a place like Dartmouth the financial aid we're able to offer and the fact that we don't package with loans. But that's not true for a lot of higher education, and we have to deal with that. I think that means having different kinds of models. It's different kinds of institutions, different ways to think about it, whether it's a 3-year degree or students at community college first. All of these are important parts of higher education. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all way to do it. I mean, I think that's really where it comes down to. And I also believe for our private institutions that a subsidy model is okay, that people who can pay full price are paying full price and helping underwrite the cost of what it means for a low-income student to go.
Do you think that, as some have proposed, including Mitch Daniels when he was president of Purdue, that the schools should be on the hook for some portion of debt write-offs if students cannot repay their loans?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea and one that is really complicated to implement, but I do think we have to be responsible for our ROI. How that happens, is a matter of debate, but we as institutions have to offer programs that help our students succeed, not saddle them with debt in a way that limits their ability to perform at the highest levels.
And it said there are no loans for students at Dartmouth, not at all.
We package without loans.
You package without loans. That's great. Okay. I think we can open it up to any questions from all of you. Just raise your hand there, and we got a mic. Yes, sir.
Hi, Ian Murray, investor, class of '86. Very interesting conversation. I want to return to centering the institution, and specifically, I have a question about the faculty. Talking to other university presidents that might want to do something like you have successfully done, say, there's no way, because if I don't have buy-in, tenure professors, they don't come to class, I don't have an institution. And they feel somewhat hamstrung. So I'm wondering, is it the nature of the Dartmouth faculty that are more receptive to this? Like, could you have done it at your prior at Columbia, for example? Or was it the idea was so good? How did you get buy-in such that the institution is able to make this shift?
Yeah, I mean, it really was the faculty leading this, and I think, as you know, Dartmouth is a special community where people can come, where people come together, and I do think there's more balance at Dartmouth than many institutions. But I think that a lot of institutions have faculty who buy into this, the idea of a university as an education, the educational mission, and it's figuring out who they are and pulling them out. So I am a member of a president's consortium developed by citizens and scholars that actually works with presidents who are interested in doing this on their campus, and then brings faculty together who might want to co-teach a course in this way for workshops to help do it on their campuses. And there's a lot of work across different nonprofits, especially right now, working with faculty to give them the tools. So one of the keys in my mind is getting faculty and giving them the opportunity to have these difficult conversations when we're not in the middle of crisis, and building that trust that way so they can model it. And then thinking about what you might do in terms of student experience, especially when students arrive on campus. And I think we can do this at any institution, but we have to have a leadership that is willing to push, and then having some faculty champions.
How important is, I mean, obviously the president of the school is crucial here, but how important is support from the board?
I think that is critical. I mean, you can't have a leader who is pushing this sort of thing unless they feel like they have support from the group that hires and fires them. And it's a culture, it's all the way down. At Dartmouth, the alums are a really important part of what we do. I think it's one of our special aspects. And it's also, again, down to the student level. So we have a bipartisan political union that's student-run, and we work to help get them funding so they could run some of these debates on campus. It turns out that they were really interested in doing them over the last 5 years, but they didn't have anyone to pay for the security fees or the speaker fees or other things. And it turns out if you can start pushing on all these levels, then I think there can be a culture shift.
Other questions? Yes, sir. Right over here. Sorry, we'll get to, why don't you do her first, and then we'll come back here.
Hi, my name is Janet Baker. Thanks for this great conversation about dialogue across difference. My question is how this concept can apply more broadly in our country. On the one hand, we've got a more diverse country than ever, and at the same time, people more segregated in the United States across like race, class, religion, and a lot of other things, and increasingly also based on their political affiliation. And there are lots of people who really never have the opportunity to really meet anyone who's different from themselves. And I'm wondering how corporations can address this. A lot of the corporate programs that have tried to address this are being challenged in court and so forth. And I'm wondering what corporations can take from the Dartmouth playbook to implement within their own organizations to make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction and to avoid sub-optimization due to employee friction.
Yeah, it's a great question. Also a Dartmouth parent. I'm calling that out. Look, I mean, I think thinking about ways to get people across your entity together and to have conversations on topics where there's not one predefined view of the company or corporation can be great. A lot of this is just listening. So we did an exercise with our first year students that we actually did with our board, my board and my senior team, where we put people together who didn't normally talk to each other, and they had a guided conversation about a really monumental experience in their life and listened and talked about their values. And I don't think we do enough of this when we have remote work, when we don't have places where people congregate, whether it is churches or temples or others, when we are segregated in our different areas. I don't think we're doing enough to intentionally put people together to just get to know one another. And I worry about that in terms of especially our students coming out who might prefer a remote work experience. They don't understand the power of being in person and contact and listening and getting to know people and realizing you can like someone with a very different political view. And so I do think there's a responsibility for corporations, especially if they want the best workforce out there, to figure out ways to put those people together. And what does that look like, and how do we help people have those skills?
I would add that we in the media have some responsibility here, because I think that because our business model has changed so much with the internet and the monopoly rents we used to be able to charge for advertising are no longer there. We have to rely on our customers, our readers. And so a lot of institutions start to pander to those readers. And then when you get a conformity that builds on itself, and suddenly you only have one kind of a reader. And that's a problem, because then you don't get any alternative points of view. Yes.
Hi, my name is Colin Teichholz. I don't really have a Dartmouth affiliation, although one of my closest friends' daughter was just accepted into your next class. So they're very excited about that. My question is about ideological diversity on university faculties at Dartmouth, but more broadly. And a discouraging story that I've heard is that that there's enough concentration of ideology kind of across the whole academy that if someone is, say, a young conservative student thinking about how to progress, that they're discouraged from seeking a PhD and trying to become a professor. And they're either just doing something totally different, they're going to a think tank, but they're going outside of that community. Do you agree with that? And either way, I mean, what's your thoughts about reversing that in order just so that we can have more of that ideological diversity on campus?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that we need to, again, about recentering, and I think that's across our institutions. And it's a little bit like the media, where you cater to people who have one viewpoint and are reading from one line. If you have faculty hiring faculty who think in one way, and the pendulum swings. And so the question is, how are we doing the work to get students who are interested in going into the academy to have multiple views and to having the academy represent that? One of the best ways we've done that at Dartmouth, and we do have ideological diversity, I would argue, across our faculty, but we need more, is to have visiting teachers, visiting faculty. There's a great program that, for example, across different universities brings in veterans to teach on particular topics. We often employ people who have been in government or in the private sector to come and teach classes, certainly through our business school, but it happens. We have an Egyptian diplomat teaching, a former Egyptian diplomat teaching in our Middle East Studies department right now. And so I think it's thinking about opportunities to bring in people for shorter periods of time as well to continue to have that exposure to students. And then I will go back and say that I do believe, and I say this very confidently, that a majority of our faculty are looking for students with different views on campus and are committed to teaching in that way. And it's up to the institution to support them in doing that.
Yes, right there. I'll get over here.
Hi, I'm actually class of 2010, so. Absent you guys creating a Dartmouth Dialogues class for alums, which if you did, that'd be awesome. I think we all like to think of ourselves as seeking diverse points of views and being great listeners. How can you actually, do you have any tests that you apply to yourself or ways to know, is that actually true? Am I actually seeking diverse points of view? Am I actually a great listener?
Yeah.
And or tips, that sounds so banal, but some way of knowing, am I getting better at this? Because I don't believe it's just young people. I actually think it's more pervasive than just blaming Gen Z. So.
Yeah, no.
As fun as that is.
Yes, as fun as that is. It's a great question. First of all, I'll say that we are doing dialogue events at reunions, so if you want to come back. And we also have a great partnership with StoryCorps that pits people together with different political views to have a structured conversation, which I think is, and we're doing that with alums too. You can sign up online. So I think the tips and tools is a really interesting idea, and we've been talking about that. Like, what are some? Could we have some checks and balances? One thing I will say is, coming at this from a psychologist as well as from learning from our Dartmouth Dialogues folks, is that one thing that I often do is I ask a question and then I stop listening. Like, I start thinking about myself and what I'm going to do next. And so really stopping to ask that question, and what the other person is doing, and then following up on what they said instead of thinking about what you're doing next. And the other thing I would ask is, are you working to put yourself in situations where you're around people with different viewpoints? Being a university president, I get that a lot. I see students, faculty, staff, donors, alums, government officials. It is amazing to me the different viewpoints out there, and also the confidence of the viewpoint someone else holds, which is not necessarily true. And so I think the more you can think about where you're getting those different viewpoints at work, with your friends, other places, and seeking them out can be helpful. I love to go to talk to people. It's not always pleasant, but I actually do like talking to people who have very different views than I do, and I think it's one of the best ways to get to outcomes. And so when we were making the decision about reinstating the SAT, I talked to the 5 faculty who were going to be most against it. Now, we continued to go along with it, but our arguments got a lot better. And some of those conversations were not pleasant.
I can just say that backing her up, because when we took a shot at you for your initial statement, you came down and gave me what for. Yes. There's a woman right over, I guess we have both. Okay, all right.
Hi, my name is Caleb Sharkey. I'm class of 2029. And
welcome to Dartmouth, Caleb.
Thank you. My question is, what do you expect the new administration will have on higher ed in Dartmouth, and how can Ivy League presidents work together with the new administration?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our administration changes constantly, right? Every 4 years, and I think it's always figuring out how we can work together to put the best policies in place. My goal is to be a resource to how the administration is thinking about educational policy, and also to do a better job of telling the story about how important the work we do is. So our endowment, for example, helps pay for financial aid. It helps subsidize the kinds of research discoveries that power our country. And so I want to tell that story and why it's not a good idea to increase the tax on it, because you're going to have to pay for it on the other end. But the idea for me is to work with the administration to help. There's no question, I think everyone thinks the Department of Education can get better at what it does. And my goal is to be a partner and to talk about the power of what Dartmouth's doing and how we can make education and our research discoveries better.
We have time for one more, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there, great.
Hi, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion, and your thoughts are so pragmatic with regards to the environment on campus. I'd be keen to get your thoughts on, in this day and age of AI and tech kind of facilitating career transitions and pivots, do you think that there is too much expectation for undergrads to declare a major and a potential career path by their second year?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a huge power in a liberal arts education. And when liberal arts, I don't mean the liberal arts and sciences. The sciences are part of the liberal arts. But what the liberal arts does is teach you how to think. And that's what we need to interact with technology and keep up with technology. I believe very strongly that your major does not dictate your career path. And we have historians who go into finance and computer science majors who end up in the arts, and I want to cultivate that. But I also believe we have a responsibility to help students learn how to collaborate with these new technologies, and that's got to be at a basic level. So right now at Dartmouth, we have an introductory writing class that all of our students take, and we are piloting this writing class this quarter, integrating AI into what's happening in the classroom. So as students learn to write in a different way, it would be interesting to have a whole conversation with you about this, Paul, at some point.
Yikes.
I want to understand how they can work with the technology.
Great, I think that's a fun counterpoint to watch Paul squirm on the idea of AI providing writing. So let's take a second and watch that. On a serious note, thank you both for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. I know everyone got a lot out of it, and we're all appreciative. So thank you again, and a hand of applause. If I can take a second just to give you a snapshot of your club and what's coming up. The team is hard at work, and we're optimistic we'll have a very wonderful 2025 as we start in the year. Next up on Tuesday, the 28th, Lionel Barber, another journalist, will be here. He was a former editor of the Financial Times, and he's going to be discussing his latest book. And then in February, we're having Alex Karp of Palantir Technologies, which is certainly timely and going to be interesting. If you didn't see, there was a cover story in New York Times Magazine maybe 3 or 4 months ago that went through his perspective on foreign affairs and how to respond in terms of public policy, which was really great. Robert Smith of Vista Equity Partners is also coming to us on the 26th of February. So anyway, let me just take a second as we close to thank our Centennial members who provide us with support for the club. There are 400 of them, and they make generous contributions. As we know, philanthropy is important to providing an underpinning to longstanding institutions. I always want to say, too, at the end, these things don't happen because someone snaps their finger. Barbara and her team at the Economic Club in New York do a great job. Thank you for what you did to make this happen today. Everyone who's in the room, please enjoy your lunch. And those of you who have joined us virtually, thanks for joining, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you all.